Hi, everyone. My name is Kaylee. I'm a bookseller at Women and Children First. We're one of just a few feminist bookstores left, and we're so thankful you're spending an evening with us to celebrate the paperback release of Emma Copley Eisenberg's The Third Rainbow Girl. Tonight, she will be in conversation with Wendy C Ortiz. We begin our virtual events as we began our events in the store with a land acknowledgement. Please join me in acknowledging that the land on which the bookstore stands is in the occupied, unceded territory of the Peoria, Potawatomi, Miami, and Sioux people. We encourage you to learn more about land acknowledgements and about the rightful owners of the land where you are viewing tonight's event. A few logistics. In just a few, I will introduce Emma and Wendy for conversation and questions. If you'd like to ask a question, there's a great Ask a Question box at the bottom of the screen. Put your questions in there, and that way we will keep them for the Q&A towards the end of tonight's event. There's also a handy Buy the Book button that will link to the Women and Children First website. For both of their books. We ship nationally and have curbside pickup if you're local. And the event will run about an hour tonight. And now for our introductions. Wendy C Ortiz is the author of Excavation, a memoir, Hollywood Notebook, and the Dremoir Bruja. Her work has been featured in the Los Angeles Times, the Los Angeles Review of Books, the New York Times Story Quarterly, and Fence, among many other places. Wendy is a parent and a psychotherapist in private practice in Los Angeles. And Emma Copley Eisenberg's fiction and nonfiction have appeared in McSweeney's, the New York Times, Granta, the Virginia Quarterly Review, Tin House, and many others. Her first book of nonfiction is The Third Rainbow Girl, The Long Life of a Double Murder in Appalachia. She lives in Philadelphia, where she directs Blue Stoop, a hub for the literary arts, which does some fantastic programming. Thank you both so much for joining us at tonight's event.
Hi. Hello.
Yay. Thank you so much, Julie. I know. Yay, Women and Children First.
Yes. Thank you for hosting.
Yay, and thank you, Wendy, for being here.
Oh, thank you, Emma, for asking me. So I want to just start with my little intro, which I think you've heard by now, Emma, but I'm going to say it again. You know, when I was approached about having this conversation, it was one of those times where I was like, what? I already wrote notes about this book. I've read the whole thing. I felt like, you know, it's like, if you're a book nerd and somebody's like, hey, you want to just like go talk to the author about this book now? I did not know Emma, for those of you wondering. We've never spoken except for like a phone call prior to this, just a couple weeks ago. But it was a really exciting opportunity and also kind of scary because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get to have this conversation with an author. So here we are. And one of the things that really drew me to your book, it's like I'll read a book and I identify with something, like something resonates for me about either my own experience, mainly about my own experience, that I'll go, wow, this feels related somehow. I feel related. I feel like the books are related. And I will sometimes call it a familial feeling, like our books are cousins. They're talking, they're like whispering to each other on the shelves, you know? And I've described other books like this before after reading them, and this feels like one of them to me. There were a number of lines that I wrote down in my notebook because, by the way, I only started last year writing, keeping a book notebook. And I wrote a bunch of lines out that stood out to me that felt so resonant and so important. And so I'm going to be bringing some of those lines here. We'll talk about some of those lines because it's like talking about something. Here's a line, and then there's so much happening underneath that line. So let's jump in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I just want to say too, real quick, that like back at Wendy, like this, it's incredible and such a like it's kind of what you hope for, I think, as a writer, which obviously Wendy well knows yourself, but like to have someone come to your book and just brings, you know, more than you thought you could bring to it, and just finding such a engaged and thoughtful reader in of my book is such a huge honor. And then also that it happens to be also a writer who I had your book for many years, and so it was a very sweet indeed, like just kismet of the universe. So back at you, Wendy, and everyone should go read Excavation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. So, you know, I'll start with a question that I feel like kind of is threaded throughout the book. Even if maybe it's only like the word monster. How do you create a monster?
Yeah.
And I'm curious, even as I say that, I think like you were so close to so many people in the book because of the time that you spent in West Virginia. I'm kind of curious, actually, do readers now tell you what they think about some of the characters that you wrote about that were people that you knew, for example? I'm kind of interested in that, but I also am curious if they've told you what they think about the monsters in the book, like any feedback you've gotten about that.
Totally. Well, I feel like part of what's so fascinating and what you're speaking to is like, so definitely there was this, right. So there's no spoilers in this book. So if you haven't read it, that's completely fine, because all the information is in the first few pages. Because part of what I'm trying to do is be like, this is not about like who did it, right? It's really like about so much more in the ways that crimes can become huge and become a story, and a really powerful story about a place. So yeah, I think I was trying to like dig into this guy who he was like the guy who was accused of the murders for a long time and who was ultimately convicted of him. And he just kind of had like a shitty reputation in town, basically. And there were just a lot of mythologies and stories about him as this kind of monster character. Yeah. And that was really what got hardened into a story. You know, it seems like he probably was kind of an asshole. And there's also like an asshole does not equal murderer, which is like something that was hard. But I think that, one thing that I wrestled with a lot was like, especially in terms of questions of representation, like there is this outsider story of like a woods in West Virginia anyway, that's like all full of monsters. Like essentially, you know, all we get about what does it mean to be like a rural person trying to live close to the land in West Virginia is like Deliverance from the 70s, right? And so I feel like I was trying to be extremely careful to like acknowledge that the story of monstrosity about Appalachia, but maybe even specifically about West Virginia, really exists. And then the way that story kind of got twisted against people themselves, you know, like that folks in the region almost were of course aware of how, you know, that story's been told about them, and then like almost kind of weaponize that against their own community member, which is really fascinating. So I was trying to be respectful about like acknowledging the story exists, acknowledging this guy wasn't like super A+ awesome neighbor, but at the same time acknowledging that, you know, there's all these nuances between being cruel to a specific person versus being a monster, and what does that mean? And just like there's so many guys who like in the sort of historical part of the book, there's all these guys who I didn't know, but the guys that I ended up hanging out with, you know, in the 2010s are in some ways sort of like the brothers or nephews or grandsons or students of a lot of those guys. And I saw them like struggle and make a lot of tough choices and maybe make some mistakes, but also like they were struggling really hard. And so I think I was able to kind of apply, hopefully, that empathy back to a lot of these guys who I didn't know, but who came up a lot in kind of official court documents about the case to say like, well, were they monsters? And I think most community members would say no, but readers a few times have been like, oh God, like, well, of course that guy did it because, you know, he did X, Y, and Z, or wow, he sounds really scary and like a drunk. And I was like, well, actually, I also learned all this other information about him, like that, you know, he was really trying to do the best he could in a really like difficult situation. So I came in like fearing that there was going to be more monsters, and in a way, sort of all of the monsters were in some way like diffused or humanized for me. Like I like was hoping for a monster, but sadly, there really were none. Yes.
You know, it's funny because I'm writing a note here, hoping for a monster, because we might come back to that, because there is something that I imagine is like, you know, there's a safety in being able to identify there's the monster.
Totally.
But it's actually so much more complicated. I was thinking too about, you know, the holler boys,
Yeah.
these men that you hung out with, and a lot of the scenes that you wrote there also reminded me of scenes that they resonated because they felt so familiar. I've written about the kind of time that I've spent with men, and I was going to say boys, but they were all, every person was like 18 or over, but sometimes felt like boys. But the time spent with men and kind of wanting to be, I think that you had a line that was like wanting to be inside that. And that was something that really resonated. But when I think about your relationships with them and how you wrote about them, and maybe what decisions you make to present these characters to us, because to us they're characters, but they're real people. It makes me curious about, people having comments about people that and I think about it, I guess, because I would sometimes have people very close to me say, after I read Excavation, it's like some act of violence. They wanted some act of violence against the character of Jeff. And there's a part of me that totally understands that, right? And there's another part of me that's like, that's interesting. Like, that's the first, that's the gut reaction. And they would frequently also tell me that they felt like it was difficult to read this character who had some positive elements to him. He was not a full-on monster, which is what I was hoping for, because I didn't understand him as a monster at the time.
Totally.
But then like dealing with people, readers, like responses to these characters that they may want to make into monsters. How do you handle that? What has that been like?
I mean, it's really hard. And I'm glad you shared what you did about the sort of villain or monster of your story, because I have questions about that too. But essentially, I feel like that was perhaps the hardest thing. Like, I think I wasn't sure if I was going to include a personal narrative or a thread about me in the book at first. It was going to be just like a purely reported story. But I have like an ambivalent relationship with the word journalist. I'm like, I don't know if that's a thing. So I tend to gravitate more towards nonfiction that is really transparent about who the writer is and what the writer is bringing to the story. And because of course we're all just always operating through our own positionality, being from where we're from, of course, race, sex, gender, all of the things. Class is a big one, and a big one in this story for me. And I felt like I wanted to show, also I didn't want to put like a story of long, long ago in like old timey West Virginia. Like, this is a real place where people are really living and thriving and also struggling and doing stuff, just like, of course, all of us. So I wanted to, I wanted to be honest about what brought me to this story, which was partly this, probably like many, many, many nights spent just like mostly playing music, mostly bluegrass music, drinking a lot and having a lot of fun and singing a lot of songs and being young and like dumb and bored. I feel like Claire Vaye Watkins has that great line on Pandering where she talks about just watching boys do stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. And I feel like that was my sort of journey in those sections of the book in some ways. Is like, at first I was just like watching boys do shit. And then by the end I was like, oh, like I am a part of this and I have to figure out how I'm going to respond to it. And do I want to be, have I gone too far? I have my own issues, my own pain that I'm, trying to smother here, and my own interest in this music and this community, and definitely masculinity. Like, at first I was just kind of like, oh, like this group of men, like it's so fun. And then at the end I was like, oh, like what does it mean to be, like the only woman in this space and a woman from elsewhere and a woman with class privilege up against folks in this space who I suppose have, certain other kinds of privileges and certain other kinds of vulnerabilities. And we probably all were in pretty active alcohol addiction at the same time together.
Right.
And I wanted to be like pretty upfront. Like, that was something I was really sensitive to, is the showing the alcohol. And I just still don't know if I made all the right decisions about that, because people are definitely like, oh, all these like drunk guys and all this stuff. And I'm like, well, that was me. Like I was doing that
Right.
also.
Yep.
And
Oh
those
yeah.
were, you know, like that was just what you did. And I don't think that,
Totally.
I don't think that those men were doing anything that, you know, many of us wouldn't have done in the same situation. So
Sometimes I
managing,
think that is like the work of the 20s, is that
right.
if you are partaking of
Mhm.
substances, this is, you know, when you do it all. And yeah, you lose nights. And I actually that was one of the lines that I had taken out, but also the idea of the searcher who had gone too far. That felt super resonant. Just thinking about, this beautiful line. I'd feel fear and energy surge up like two dolphins rising in sync and know that a tide of alcohol was coming and that I'd lose the night tomorrow. Yeah, there's probably a lot of us that would resonate for from our 20s. Are you there, Emma? You froze on my end. Uh-oh. Huh. Okay, Emma's frozen. I don't know if she can hear me. Oh, there you are. Hi, Emma. Can you hear me? Emma? Uh-oh. Okay, it's just me now, but now I don't know where Emma is. Give us one moment, everybody. I think she'll probably rejoin me shortly. In the meantime, I'm going to scroll through here and just take note of the questions. Oh, great. Okay. Oh, thank you to people saying hi. We're waiting for a connection. Okay. Sorry, everybody. We're waiting for a connection to refresh, I think. I hope that you all have read this book. Now I feel like I need to entertain you, but I'm going to show you my hard copy. There's my hard copy book. The paperback is out. I hope you'll buy it tonight from Women and Children First. And I don't see any specific questions here yet. Oh, are we back? Hi.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
That's
that was
okay.
a dramatic exit, but this was a dramatic entrance back. To be in the country, as we are discussing, sometimes comes with beautiful challenges. So
yeah, totally.
Yes.
I told my family, I was like, do not use the internet between 5 and 6 p.m. today.
So wise. Okay.
But it's okay.
So sorry.
It's great. It was like a little commercial. I showed your book and it was awesome.
Oh, thank you.
So, you know, I want to come back to something, you know, when you were talking about, you weren't sure that you were going to include your own narrative in this book. And, you know, it's funny because the first time I read it, I think that in my mind later, I thought that there was so much more personal narrative. And then in my second reading to prepare, I was like, oh my gosh, if I like looked at just, you know, this many pages and like this many pages reported, beautiful, you can feel the 5 years of reporting and research that you did. And then the personal narrative is like smaller, but it's just the right amount. And it made me curious, like, how did you decide how much of your personal narrative goes in this book? How did you make those decisions?
Very changeable mindedly and many times. Those are words. Yeah, I mean, essentially, I just wrestled with all the questions of like, if I put myself in it, am I putting my own story sort of on a ethical or you know, on a scale of trauma that's equal or that takes away from the much more significant sort of events that happen to many other folks living and dead who are real people. Or if I take myself out, is that fake? Being like, I am the puppet master journalist, you know, like just cycling through all those different scenarios. So yeah, I kind of like underwrote, I think, the personal element and then expanded it and then shrunk it back down. And my editor was great. And he was, you know, blessed be all the people who work with authors, you know, like the people that can see what we're doing when we just do not. And so he helped me to, I had all these like very fancy, I was like, it's going to be a bluegrass band. Like it's going to have like 5 parts and the first part's going to be like, it was like really convoluted and over intellectualized. And he was like, no. And he helped me just kind of see like what of the stuff that is my stuff like speaks to or resonates with the historical and the crime material, and what is just like me having feelings that I can go put somewhere else, like in a personal essay.
Right.
And so we landed on that the book had 7 parts, and 2 of them are me, basically, and 5 of them are the reported historical material. So it's like a little less than a third, I guess. So I'm still not sure, like I made all the right decisions, but I think it was, I wanted to like be sort of a guide and kind of like ask all the dumb questions that a lot of people ask who are not from West Virginia or don't get it. And I hope that introducing also a lot of history and context about Appalachia and the way that West Virginia within Appalachia functions, and then the way Appalachia functions more broadly in the States, that would almost kind of tie into my personal narrative, because I was learning all that stuff along with the reader in a way.
Right.
I didn't know any of that until people taught me. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm still just like trying to imagine how to make those decisions. I mean, I feel like when I get those questions, I can easily always be like, I don't know, my editor helped me figure that out. Like I didn't know, but
Blessed.
Are there things that you wish that you had included about your own personal narrative?
I think I actually talked about this at Women and Children First in real life, which makes me so happy, because I feel like best questions, best vibes from Chicago. And I feel like the true answer to that question is like, there's only one thing that I feel like I really would have liked to include a little bit more, but it was just hard. And again, like, I didn't want to overwhelm the book with my own like feelings and judgments about stuff that.
Yes. I think you're frozen.
I think a lot about what it means to do national service, to have been a VISTA worker, which is specifically stands for Volunteers in Service to America. So is, a branch of.
I think we just lost Emma. Okay, so we're going to give her a moment to refresh her connection and come on back. Let's see. Okay. Everybody's excited to be here. That's what I'm reading in the chat. Okay, I think you're back. There, hi.
Deeply sorry, friends. Okay, one more try.
No worries.
Thank you so much, Wendy, and all for your understanding. Basically, national service is complicated, is what I was trying to say. Being an AmeriCorps worker is complicated. AmeriCorps was set up as like a domestic Peace Corps, basically, in the 60s. And, like, does it make sense to be sending young, mostly, it's changing, so good job, AmeriCorps and VISTA specifically. Okay. But mostly young, often unskilled, college graduates like me to some of our most entrenched areas of poverty in the world or in the States. Like, does that make sense? Are we the right sort of aid to go there? I think that was something that I was wrestling with, and especially West Virginia has a really old and long history. West Virginia and Kentucky do with AmeriCorps in particular, because they were really the first vistas went actually to West Virginia and Kentucky and to uptown Chicago, which is where a lot of Appalachian migrants ended up, right? So I think it has a really loaded history to come to West Virginia or Kentucky and be like, I'm an AmeriCorps worker. Specifically, I'm a VISTA, which the VISTA program is specifically a poverty alleviation program. So like, that's hard. And how did that influence my relationships with people there? And, it certainly did. And so in many ways, I think when I was there, I was kind of trying to like shrug off that label. And I did live in the community for like about 6 months, 9 months after. So like I was no longer, a VISTA technically, but it's still, that was the reason I was there. So it's hard to separate the idea of service and sort of, who gave what to whom and what, who's benefiting whom. And in many ways I felt like I, it's like cheesy, like I learned so much more or whatever, but I actually came to really doubt the structure that put me there in the first place. And at the same time, it did rewire my brain and my life. And so if it's for us, like aka like the me's who are like trying to figure out our lives, then great. But like I don't know that it really benefits communities that need like structural long-term.
Yeah. Uh-oh, you just froze. Okay, so as soon as Emma gets back, I don't know if you can hear us. As soon as Emma gets back, I will probably throw a couple of other lines out here that I just love and that also just made me, oh, hi, are you back? No, we see a frozen Emma. Oh, okay, now we just see me. All right. And my lighting is super weird. Sorry, everybody. I feel like I want to just tell you lines, but I want Emma to be here, so I won't just read you lines. Let's give her a moment to come on back. Wait, yes, we can. Meredith, what did I say that you are saying yes, we can? Okay, hi. Okay.
I'm just going to continue.
It's fine.
Yeah, I'm just going to continue
totally
coming
fine.
back. I am here. I can hear everything.
Oh, you can hear everything. Great. Okay.
Yes.
So, shall we switch gears a little bit?
Let's do it. Yeah. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like I would love to know some similar, supposedly the structure everyone says is like, you know, the way that a book kind of falls into place. And I felt like in Wendy's book, Excavation, you go back and forth between a time when there's a more mature narrator who can see, you know, that this abuse took place, and then the character herself who is sort of telling it in the present, in the forward motion. So how did you come up with that structure, and you know, how did this idea of excavation come to you, rather than just writing like, here's a straight narrative of what happened, etc.?
So it was originally straight narrative for years. All the original drafts are all straight narrative. And it wasn't until like 2 or 3 years before it was published that it finally occurred to me. Like enough feedback was given to me that I finally understood that it didn't make sense to just have that straight chronological narrative. And, you know, I might have internalized some really early feedback I got. Like my first MFA mentor had said, when I gave him the first, you know, chapter draft, it was so like, it was like I was doing something really, I was obscuring a lot of what was happening. It was written in very poetic language. It was almost like you couldn't figure out what was going on. And he was like, first, you need to go back and write it all chronologically, beginning to end. Then we'll see what we do with it. You know, then you figure it out. And I was like, okay. But it also took me so many years to do that because it's a heavy story and I didn't love spending a lot of time with it. So it took me that long, and it took like, I think a few people suggested, like one in particular reminded me that if you're going to take people on the journey to hell, you need to bring them back. And sometimes that means you remind them of where you are now. So that they know that they can come back. And that really felt right to me, but it took me a long time to get there, to be able to go, oh, okay, yeah, people would want to know what happened to this person. You know, what happened to the girl that I'm writing about. So that it finally it clicked, and I was like, okay, I need to have contemporary chapters that are spliced in here. And then the idea of excavation really came, it was like timing, because my kid was at the time like 1, 2, and fascinated by all the vehicles, like, you know, things that I would never remember the names of these vehicles because I don't pay attention to them, but like excavator was a big one. And just, I mean, my life at that time was being at home with my kid. And so like all the stuff was getting filtered through that. And it just was like, ooh, right. This is an excavation. And this is also like an interesting way to tie this back to who I am now,
Yeah.
which is so different than the younger character that I'm writing about.
I love that.
So
Yeah.
it kind of just came together, but it took many years for me to figure out that I couldn't just give readers like this really hard, intense story without ever mentioning what happens to that person.
Mm-hmm. And I love that that person is a writer, you know, that that person is wrestling with being a writer and telling stories. You know, the contemporary line is so much about, you know, sort of finding a structure for the story itself. Like it all kind of orbits around this center of asking that question. So it just works so well. And I feel like there's a question in the chat from Lindsay, but that just makes me want, which is kind of very similar to one I wanted to ask you to just, and I'm sure we'll get into it more, like when, if ever, does someone deserve the label of monster? Does everyone deserve a moral ambivalence? Because like in my case, there was a lot of gray area. There's a lot of stuff that happened that was really hard to parse, but in some ways, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of ambivalence, and you give a lot of nuance and richness to everyone in your book. But yeah, this is a real trauma, and this person was bad. So how do you deal with, the idea of offering someone on the page that kind of empathy and giving that ambivalence to the reader?
You know, so when I think about like the person that is the villain, the evil, you know, the monster of my book, who is this teacher, you know, I guess monsters are always going to be just as informed by their environments and everything that's happened to them. So, you know, I don't use the word monster in my everyday language to describe people. There are a few words that I personally just can't use when I'm talking about actual people. Like, I know a lot of people are like, that person's trash, and I can't go all the way there about anybody. Like, of course, you know, I can look at somebody like the former president and be like, this is a fucking shit show. This is a monster. This is, you know, and I feel like that is justified. But there's very few people in my personal sphere that I would be able to identify as trash or a monster. It hurts me on some weird human level to imagine that that's all that person is ever capable of. And maybe this is partially informed by being a therapist. I, you know, when I think about like problematic clients who, you know, some person standing by might go, oh, like that person has got monster energy or something. Like, that's not going to work if I'm in a room with that person trying to work with them, right? I have to come at it from a completely different place of total non-judgment and compassion. So I will say that, you know, I'm not treating people like Jeff in my practice, for example. That's not going to work for me. You know, I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. But do people like Jeff deserve care? Yeah. If they don't, things are going to get worse.
Yeah.
You know, and things did get worse. I mean, there's like a whole other backstory about him and what happened to him. And none of that is included in the book. But, you know, I know that he's a complex character, and there were so many things that as a young person I admired. I think of him often as one of the first people that introduced the idea of social justice to me, which is a really fucking weird thing to think about.
Truth.
So, you know, I can identify some of the good things that I learned from that relationship, some of the weird things that I learned and was just taught. But overall, yeah, it's a trauma. Overall, it is sexual abuse, which is something that I did not want to say explicitly in my book because I wanted people to come to their own decision about it, what to call it. I wanted to make it just as complex for the reader. So
you did. You absolutely did. And I feel like, I feel like you make that clear also that this is someone who, in a creepy way, respected you as a writer and storyteller, which
Yep.
is hard.
Right.
And I think like, the idea of like everyone, and this question of like, when does everyone deserve moral ambivalence? I'm kind of like, unfortunately, yes, probably. Like, I don't know. There's no answer to that, but like
there is no answer to that.
There's like a terrible, terrible man in my book, in this guy, Joseph Paul Franklin, who is a serial killer who, he shot Larry Flint. Actually, Larry Flint just died today, which is a weird coincidence.
What?
But yes,
oh my God.
I know. Literally just before I got on, I was like, no,
Holy
Larry
shit.
Flint.
Okay.
But Joseph Paul Franklin was a racist, white supremacist guy who drove around America in the 70s and 80s, killing people, mostly black men, a lot of black men and white women couples together, and, ended and harmed so many people. And he appears in the book because many people believe he actually was the one who killed these two women, and yada yada. But basically, when I learned about his upbringing and his illness, that he was extremely mentally ill, and there's a really difficult and impactful interview I did that's in the book, where he talks about at the end of his life, being about to be executed, he looked on the TV in the prison and saw all of these white supremacist rallies that are happening, now, basically, like, this was in like 2017. And he said, I wish, like, at this point he was medicated and he was aware, of all the harm he had caused. And he was like, I wish that these people, these like children or young people who are supporting white supremacist views, like, I wish they knew how much they were throwing their lives away. Like, that white supremacy is an illness, kind of. And he
had a big shift.
He did. And it was, there's a lot of research about brain injury and schizophrenia and the way those work together. And, none of that is justified and none of that is okay. And also, he was a person and he lived a long time and he did a lot of other stuff, and it's all just there, right? We just like are holding it all at the same time. Always. I don't know.
Yeah. So, I mean, I will say the same thing. Does everyone deserve a moral ambivalence? I'm not sure that I have an answer for that. I want to switch gears and talk about a character who makes very brief little appearances. And you might need to just set her up for us just a tiny bit. I'm thinking about the redheaded girl. Could you set her up for us a little?
Definitely. So she is the only composite character in the book because I was dealing with the rights and privacy of minors. So I worked at the nonprofit that's in the book that brought me in many ways to the area, is a nonprofit for young women 12 to 18. So privacy issues there. But basically what I was trying to show the reader with her was like how smart and various and also, in many ways, like free and thriving, and in many ways trapped and struggling, many of the young women that I worked with there were and are. And in the way I sort of saw her as a person, like a couple of the real people who made her up, was someone who was seeing, I think, in many ways, like the realities of the town that she was living in, which the county, Pocahontas County, is beautiful, fucking gorgeous, one of the most amazingly beautiful places on this planet. And also, it's hard for people who are young to stay. A lot of people leave, and a lot of girls especially leave. That was something that was really clear, that if you were a girl who could get good grades, like, you were gone. Because there just weren't a lot of like the jobs, like, manual labor jobs, like, it wasn't really like a thing a lot of times for girls to work those jobs. So I saw, these smart, really perceptive kids, most of them girls, looking around, seeing the world, and getting really angry at times, just enraged. I felt a lot of like this pent up rage of like, I don't know what to do with this feeling, kind of. And I recognize that a lot. And I think that there is, just a sense of what happens when rage is really sort of bottled up over time. And the ways that I saw, like, a lot of these kids, like, just trying to figure out ways to articulate themselves and have a voice and think about the future. And it was just like hard. Yeah.
Okay. I love knowing now that this is a composite character. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Whenever she kind of pops in and leaves a big impression. At least that's how I read it. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I have like a vision of her in one of the scenes that you wrote. And it's one of those resonances where I just think like how to talk to this person, composite character, how, like, what are the best ways of communicating with this person who is also looking at you from some remove and like not sure who you are, and like how do you make that kind of connection, and how, like, it also made me think of my younger self, like how do I connect with that younger part? And when I think about like how I would have talked to myself if I had, you know, been able to talk to that younger version, which is really, I mean, it's really hard. And I'm saying this as a therapist. I find it really difficult to come up with the best way to help a younger person trust you.
Yeah.
First of all, like that alone is really big. And what are the ways to approach the redheaded girl, you know, like, who,
I mean, it's a really important and perceptive question, I think, because the nonprofit that I was there to be a part of, their mission was, you know, educate, empower, inspire, basically young women, although that ended up including many non-binary kids and trans boys. But yeah, I feel like the idea of working with kids who are, you know, either women or queer, are on the, you know, in between gender spectrum, think about the future, it's wrapped around the DNA of this book. Because I think I came to the book thinking so much about the kids that I had worked with and wanting to write a book that didn't speak about them, but spoke to them and didn't make them feel shame, but made them potentially feel, I don't know, maybe pissed off, maybe curious, maybe some answers or some additional insight into questions that are around in the community a lot. And I think, I mean, I was really thrown into the deep end of like youth empowerment work, just sort of told like, I just watched a lot of people, educators, older people, many of them women from West Virginia, do some really amazing shit with kids. And I think that culture, you know, that place, which is specifically the work that was being done in this nonprofit, is in the heart of the book, which is thinking about, thinking about hopefulness, thinking about communities, queer communities, feminist communities, which many of the kids were queer identified. I tried to include like the sort of current, what was going on with like a person who was the redheaded girl, so a couple current kids, composite figures, and then the book does include like an extended interview with one of the participants who's a trans man who was talking about their time in the program and how they live now in the specific county where all this took place, and what does it mean to be learning about like misogyny and gender-based violence as a trans boy, teenage boy, and then man. And also West Virginia has the highest per capita number of trans kids in the country. So it's a place that has, fun facts. West Virginia has a lot of trans people and a lot of queers. And I think that was something that was also wrapped around the DNA, was how do I represent this place that was in many ways like super queer, super radical, in this sort of context of this woods and this community that in many ways like made that little pocket possible, and also sometimes felt hostile, and just kind of that bothness and togetherness all the time. And there were definitely moments that I like screwed up big time, and there's definitely moments where I certainly said the wrong thing, and I definitely feel like a lot of shame and sadness for the ways that like those girls saw me making some not great decisions, and what does that mean? And also I wasn't that much older than them, you know, and that there really aren't in a lot of Appalachian communities, but specifically in this community in West Virginia, there were not a lot of people between the ages of like 20 and 30 who live in the community still. And so it's a lot of responsibility to be one of the only like women in that age group. And I did take that seriously, and I also didn't do all the right things. So just, I think like that is in there. That's in the book for sure. So thanks for asking about it. Yeah.
I feel like a little bit like the therapist part of me wants to let you off the hook about like what, decisions you made because you were also very young, like you said, not much older than them, which kind of just makes me think again about like the presence of alcohol here. And like, again, the resonance is, it's funny because the resonance I felt more was from Hollywood Notebook. When I was thinking about like the kind of drinking that you're describing, I will like, there's a part of me that is always going to read passages about that kind of drinking and want it because there's something very compelling about that for me. And yet we also know that it can make you, you can turn into the searcher who had gone too far.
Yep. Yeah.
And you're way out there.
Yeah. And I think like that was another hard thing to try to render is like the beauty of those nights. Like watching boys do shit can be really beautiful.
Right.
When the boys are beautiful, when the alcohol is good, and when they love each other. Like there was so much love in that group of guy friends that was really surprising.
You do an amazing job of rendering all of that because I was feeling it. And I would say that it wasn't just the resonance that, makes me feel that way, but it's really well done. I think that it's necessary because in order to understand like, what is compelling about like hanging out with a bunch of boys, drinking, listening to music. Well, we know something about that.
Yeah. And they were creating, I mean, they were playing music and creating, it was band practice, basically. I was there for it was their bluegrass band practice.
Right.
And that is so special and a real thing. It's like one of the only ways I think men are allowed to like be close and take physical cues from each other and like touch each other. And they were like wanting that. They really like had each other's backs and really, really loved each other in some ways that were really beautiful and also kind of problematic at times. And all the things are there. So,
right.
And I feel like there's definitely like some great questions I feel like in the chat that relate to that too. Like someone's talking about class, like the idea of the question of class is so important. How does it show up in both of your books? And I feel like I've kind of mentioned
Where is that question?
Oh, if you click on our ask a question part, we can see these.
Oh, I'm looking at chat. Sorry, everybody.
No worries. This is great. Yeah. And I'm just like, I have so many thoughts about this, but essentially I like had mobility, I had class mobility. And I was thinking a lot about like, I think it came up most in the being there and then in the writing and just not knowing how to represent it except for telling the truth about it and saying like, this is what I had and this is what I didn't have. And I tried to be super like at first, like, sort of hands off of like, I don't want to interject like my own sort of New York-y middle class stuff onto folks. And then I think I was also grappling with how to be authentic in community with people without like putting your class shit on them. So, but what about your book?
With Excavation, there is not a specific way that I was drawing class out. With certain details, I knew that I was dropping hints about class. But what was important to me, similarly to avoiding the word sexual abuse, I wanted to let the reader understand that this was a person who couldn't even articulate these things yet.
Yeah.
The person that I was between the ages of 14 to about 18, race and class were unspoken. We did not talk about that. And there were awarenesses there for me, but I didn't yet know how to talk about them. So I wanted to kind of keep it in a frame of this is how this person at this age was viewing all of this. I didn't want to call it sexual abuse because she wouldn't have called it that. So it was kind of like, okay, I don't want to like belabor the point here, but I will give details here and there about where I am. I'm going to a private school. So that gives you some kind, I have to be somewhere in the middle class to be able to afford private school. So that was
Yeah.
like one of the details that I felt was like, okay, here we are, class. But that was not even a language that I had yet. So it seemed like keeping in character meant that it wasn't going to be drawn out and discussed.
I feel like there is so much interesting class material in your book too, because there's like all these scenes of you know, how this guy lives and his furniture and you know, the beer cans and stuff that is as a young person processing all that information for the first time, but it's not named. And I think, you know, maybe both of our books talk a little bit about the intersection of like class power and sexual power. And, you know, I think that there's no good answer about like who has more, better, different powers in those situations. And like, it's just all in there and it's all hard and matters.
Yeah, it gets real mucky.
Yeah.
So I am looking now at the questions and I see here, Emma, can you discuss what went into your decision to structure your prologue as you did? That's from Barbara.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. Hi, Barbara. Yeah, I saw your comment that you're in Highland County. Great to have you here. Yeah, I so many things. Basically, for many folks who are like working on long projects or like, you know, that it takes like a long time to kind of figure out like what your book is about, I think. And yeah, like I knew I wanted to write about Pocahontas County. I knew that these events in which these two women were murdered and then all these guys were accused and locked up was important to me to think about. And I was like obsessive about it, but I didn't yet know like what was the point of all that. Yeah. How I was going to make clear my own, you know, position or sort of telling in the story. And I was like, I think maybe 5 years in already when I had done a lot of research and talked to a lot of people and written a lot of words. And I talked to my agent and I was like, I got it. Like, let's go sell this book. And she was like, no. She was like, no, it's like not ready. Like, I don't really know what this is. And I was like, ah. And so then I went back to Pocahontas County to see some friends and was like sitting in a beautiful place as is Pocahontas County. And I basically just asked myself like, okay, like what do I know? Like there's so much in this book that's shifty that no one agrees on, that is about the contradictory nature of holding multiple truths, that is about how stories hurt people, but also stories free people. And I was just like, okay, like what do I know to be true?
Yeah.
And so I just made a list.
Things.
Yeah,
I love this. I love this.
And that's it. Yeah, and it was the last thing I wrote before we sold the book. So it was in some ways it was the latest. It was the latest thing.
Yeah, for folks who don't know the book yet, so the prologue is titled True Things, and it's a list. It's paragraphs, and there's 16. And what I loved about this prologue is that it literally just puts you right there and says, here are the things. Like here's where you can. It's like you can almost come back and go, okay, what are the true things here? You know, it's a way of just grounding us as a reader in what we're about to go into. And there's a lot in there. I mean, it is almost like. I mean, I'm shocked that you wrote this after. This was the last thing that you wrote.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I mean,
wow.
I think it just takes a long time. Yeah, again, just to know what you think is true. And like, I think for this book, I love talking to people and I'm also scared of it, but mostly I love it in terms of like, people just tell you shit that you don't know and that no one has ever, that doesn't exist on the internet because no one's ever asked, you know, these people, like what this particular person, what they, you know, what information they have. And I just felt like the way I thought about the events of this book and the people who died and the men who were accused and their lives were tanked in many ways, like I just kept like changing my mind about, like I would be like, yeah, okay, like this is a story, like it's like this happened and then this person was like wrongly accused or whatever, and then I would go talk to someone new and they were like, oh no, that's not how it happened at all. You know, and I was like, grr. So I felt like what happened was that there was never a place where I could land where it felt done or neat or and so gosh. I think the only way that I could make sense of it was just like a list. Like there was no paragraph in terms of describing this as a story. It was only a list. So I was like, okay, this is all we got. So that's how it came about. And get you like an editor who's willing to like buy a book that starts with a list. Don't know.
It's it's a juicy list because there's a lot of information packed into it that, like, how could you stop reading after you read that list? You know, of course you want to keep going and find out all of the details of what's in here.
Well, a lot of people are like mad about it because they're like, well, you've given away all the crime. You know, a lot of folks who really love true crime are like really mad about the list. They're like, you know, I wanted like the idea that it should be held back. Like I should have created suspense.
Oh,
you know?
my God.
And I think it's just fascinating. Like it's just different kinds of readers. So I love that you're a reader who likes that as opposed to
wow, interesting.
Yes. Yeah.
Can I just say one line that
of course
struck me? That it's like it's so straightforward and it speaks to what we've been talking about, but it is possible to be a victim and a perpetrator at the same time. Most of us are.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we all hear that enough. You know? Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about that. And I also will say too that what comes to mind is Sarah Schulman's book, Conflict is Not Abuse, which is a book that I think about a lot and often wish that we had a case book that went with it that showed us like 20 different examples, complicated examples that help remind us that, you know, what are victims, what are perpetrators, and also when we have victims and perpetrators, how do we see our way through to something restorative?
100%. I literally just had a book club with like a bunch of folks who I was like, I'm reading Conflict is Not Abuse. I have so many feelings. And like 6 people just sort of magically reached out to me through the internet and were like, me too, let's talk about it. And that book I feel like has so much, it asks so many things that are not answered in the book, and that's okay. But it is a very dramatic paradigm shift of, restoration and the idea that communities have a sort of this idea of duty of repair, and also that there are, you know, it's tricky because she doesn't sort of even believe in, it feels like, perpetrators and victims, which is valuable and also controversial in the sense of like, you know, she kind of advocates for just calling people in conflict the conflicted, right? And does that make sense in every case? I don't know, but I think it's a really no, probably not. But it's a really radical and interesting question, I think, to ask that. And someone put in the Q&A too about like what's the difference between writing fiction and nonfiction. I don't know if you write across genre lines as well, but I feel like for fiction, like there's so much room to just kind of play with language and you know, just kind of lean into the unknown of like the great beyond, which is our imagination. And I think in reporting, it's like there is also a great beyond, which is like, as I was saying, like people's knowledge. Reporting produces such beautiful surprises, I think. And like the only way that I feel like this book works is because people were able to give me things I didn't know and things I didn't know. And so I think like looking for that surprise, this idea of like, victims and perpetrators very much came from someone sharing with me, like, I don't think that's a thing. And in this case, like those boundaries kind of dissolve. So I think like talking to real people who have a lot of stake and a lot of complicated thoughts about these issues are how a lot of those lines were formed. So I'm really grateful to folks for that too.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Do you want to answer another question? And then a long one just showed up. I was going to ask you, you might have gotten this question a lot before, and, you know, maybe you have a 1-sentence answer. I don't know. How do you relate or not relate to the genre of true crime?
Yes.
I think that you probably talked about that. Yeah.
I have a long rant about that in this. You should all read or all listen, to the podcast Reading Women. They're so wonderful. And Kendra Winchester, who runs it, or is one of the main folks who runs it, is from Appalachia and also runs this sort of like companion site called Read Appalachia, and she and I got to chat a lot about that. So I guess if like you want the whole true crime spiel, you can listen to us bash true crime over on Reading Women. But in short, it's a thing that I respect, and I don't know if my book is it. And also, many people are doing really cool things within it right now that have to do with social justice. And if that's true, then I'm honored to be in such company. But complicated. Yeah. And I think you have one in there about your short chapters real quick too. So is there anything that you want to share with folks about how you made the choice to structure your book in such vibrant, small chunks?
You know what? I mean, honestly, sometimes these kinds of questions, I'm like, I don't remember. I literally do not remember.
It's a fugue state. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I mean, honestly, to me, the best writing I ever do is the writing I don't remember writing. You know, like if I'm just like, I look at it later and I'm like, oh, I did that. All right, cool. But, and in some ways, I will say though that probably there is something about how hard it is to stay with that content that I think, sure, I may have blocked some of it out, like the writing of it. But in some ways, it like if I tried to write longer chapters about the things that I wrote about in Excavation, I think I might overwhelm myself.
Yeah.
It seemed to like as a timing thing, I don't want to overwhelm myself, and I also don't want to overwhelm a reader. And it's kind of related to that thing of like, I'm going to take you to hell, but I can't just like leave you there. And to me, the idea of like, if it was just this sustained like narrative with no chapter breaks to take a breath from reading something intense, I don't know. I don't want to do that to people, I guess. And I also just didn't want to do it to myself, perhaps.
Yes. That's so nice. I feel like I tortured my reader a little bit more. And this is not a question that was asked, but I feel like relates because we have such an amazing writer and therapist here, which is like, yes, both Wendy and my books are really difficult material. And I would say like, if you are out there like writing a book that's tough, like get yourself a wonderful therapist. Like that was so key. And like, I feel like people don't talk about taking care of oneself enough, like writing through difficult material. So like for folks that are venturing into murder, perhaps, like it's really intense, even if it's not, even if you don't think that it will be, it will. So yes, think about your own, bring yourself back as well. So I appreciate that.
It's funny that you say that though. I know we're just about out of time, but I'm just realizing then the impact it must have had on you. In particular, I'm thinking about interviewing the families of the young women.
Yeah. Yeah, that was tough.
Yeah. So
it was tough, and it was tough, and it was also really beautiful because there's so much in the book about inherited trauma, and it makes me want to read so much more about inherited trauma. But basically, I mean, the families of these two women were 100% passing down all of this trauma in ways that they were, really trying to deal with and confront, and also struggling to confront. And so, I feel like it was really beautiful. They were, both families were super amazing and willing to sort of go there with me. But I definitely, I dreamed about murder like every night for like 3 years. And I feel like that is just a true thing. It's a true thing. And I have, it's a list. And the list of true things was murder dreams, and also that I got to meet like these amazing people who talked to me a lot about how they're dealing with their trauma and like the amazing lives that they lived. The third Rainbow Girl is this woman who traveled with these two women who died, but she herself did not die. And the idea of like building this beautiful and strange and kind of out of the box and adventurous life, even in the midst of being proximate to so much trauma, is something I really respect.
Yeah. Wow. Do I have any more questions? We don't have any more questions. I don't know what time it is, but I think that we're closing up here.
I think it's probably time. Thank you.
Hi.
Really, yeah. Yay.
Hi, Kaylee.
Okay.
Are we done? Oh, wait, we can't hear you.
I was doing a weird.
Oh, there we go.
Sorry, I was like,
Okay.
pop up. Thank you both and everyone so much for the incredible conversation.
Thank you.
A delightful time. Again, the books are the Buy the Books button, both available on our website, as well as Conflict is Not Abuse, which was referenced.
Yes.
Yes.
Incredible.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much, and have a good evening.
Yay.
Thank you
all
so much. Bye, everybody.
Much appreciated. Bye.
Bye.